Take Marianne, your grace. We have hidden her long enough, and perhaps even you may find some use for what the rest of us could not sell." Lady Corisande Valcombe said it with one hand resting upon her daughter Arabella's shoulder, and the other lifting her champagne glass toward the Duke of Ravenshade. Laughter moved through the ballroom. It began near the card tables, then spread beneath the chandeliers, soft and poisonous, until Marianne heard it from people who had eaten at her father's table for years. She stood beside a marble column in a gown 3 seasons old. Her father did not defend her. Lord Edmund Valcombe merely lowered his eyes. Arabella pressed a gloved hand to her mouth, pretending embarrassment, while failing to hide her smile. Someone murmured that Marianne was nearly 30. Another answered that even a duke could not be expected to perform miracles. The laughter rose again. Marianne felt heat reach her face, though the winter beyond the tall windows was hard enough to silver the glass with frost. The Duke of Ravenshade did not laugh. He looked at Marianne for several long seconds. Then he turned to her family. "Why," he asked, "have you hidden her from me?" The room became utterly still, and none of them yet understood that his question had touched a secret capable of shaking Valcombe to its foundations. Before we return to the beginning, tell us where you are listening from tonight. If stories of dignity, courage, and justice among England's great houses are your pleasure, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next chapter. And if you wish to support the channel, your kindness helps these stories continue. Now let us go back to where Marianne's humiliation truly began. 3 winters earlier, no one at Valcombe would have called Marianne useless. They simply avoided admitting how useful she was. She had been 26, then the eldest surviving daughter of Lord Edmund Valcombe, an earl whose family possessed a respectable title, a large country house, several farms, and considerably less money than polite society imagined. Her mother had died when Marianne was 17. Within 2 years, Lord Edmund married Corisande Belhurst, the widowed daughter of a baronet who possessed beauty, ambition, excellent manners, and an instinct for weakness so sharp that she rarely needed to raise her voice. Corisande brought one daughter with her. Arabella had been 11. Marianne had been 19. At first, the difference between them seemed too great for rivalry. Marianne helped the child with French verbs, mended the torn ribbon of her first evening dress, and once sat beside her through an entire night of fever, while Corisande slept in the next room after complaining of a headache. Arabella remembered none of those things when she grew beautiful. Or perhaps she remembered them too well. By 18, Arabella had the particular sort of prettiness that caused older women to smile approvingly and young men to forget what they had meant to say. She was golden-haired, small-waisted, and practiced in looking surprised whenever praised. Marianne was different. She was tall. Her brown hair was heavy rather than fashionable. Her face did not change charmingly with every emotion. Her eyes were grey, steady, and too observant for people who preferred not to be observed. She had received 3 respectable proposals between 19 and 23. Her father had refused 2. Corisande had quietly destroyed the 3rd. Marianne did not know that yet. What Marianne did know was that after her father's 2nd marriage, certain responsibilities began falling into her hands. The housekeeper came to her when winter coal disappeared too quickly. The steward came when a tenant's figures did not agree with the estate ledger. The cook came when suppliers raised their prices. Her father came when letters from London contained columns of numbers he did not wish to understand. Marianne understood them. She had a clean, patient mind. Numbers did not flatter. They did not whisper. They did not smile at dinner and steal from you the following morning. They either balanced or they did not. For the first time in her life, Marianne found something that did not require her to be beautiful in order to be valued. So she learned. She learned rents, seed costs, repairs, wages, debts. She learned which farms flooded in winter and which roofs required slate before spring. She learned that £100 carelessly borrowed could cost more than 1,000 wisely spent. And slowly, without any formal announcement, Valcombe began depending upon her. Corisande noticed. That was when kindness in the house changed its temperature. Not openly, never openly. Marianne still had a place at dinner. She still received gowns, though usually after Arabella had chosen hers. She still attended church in the family pew, but invitations began arriving with only Arabella's name mentioned. When visitors came, Marianne was often asked to inspect the kitchens. When a London family stayed for several nights, Corisande discovered some urgent estate correspondence requiring Marianne's attention. When eligible gentlemen were expected, Marianne was told that her father had one of his headaches and wished her to review accounts in the library. Marianne noticed the pattern. She did not yet understand its purpose. One December evening she found Corisande standing before the locked desk in Lord Edmund's study. The room smelled of wax-old leather and dying fire. Corisande turned when Marianne entered. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. The silence felt wrong, not empty, occupied. Corisande's fingers rested on the small brass key already inserted into the upper drawer. Marianne looked at the key, then at her stepmother. "Your father asked for the household accounts," Corisande said. "They are kept in the lower cabinet." "I know." Again silence. Corisande removed the key. The upper drawer clicked shut. Marianne had used that study often. She knew what belonged where. The locked upper drawer did not contain household accounts. It contained papers. Her father almost never touched old agreements, family correspondence, legal copies and documents left after Marianne's mother died. Marianne said nothing. Corisande smiled. "You spend too much time with ledgers, my dear. It makes you suspicious." "Not suspicious," Marianne answered. "Accurate." Corisande's smile vanished for less than a second. It was enough. That winter the estate changed. A tenant named Mr. Ames was told that his arrears had doubled. He came to the servants' entrance in the rain hat, crushed between his hands, insisting he had paid nearly all he owed. The steward produced a ledger, proving otherwise. Marianne examined it. The figures were clean, too clean. She asked for the previous year's book. The steward hesitated. That hesitation saved Mr. Ames from eviction. Marianne found a payment entered in the older ledger, but absent from the copied balance. £28, not a fortune to an earl. Half a year's survival to a tenant. Her father was embarrassed. Corisande was displeased. The steward blamed a copying error. Marianne corrected it. That should have been the end. Instead, 3 days later, her key to the estate office disappeared. No accusation was made. No explanation was offered. A servant brought her tea while she searched. Old Mrs. Keene, who had served Marianne's mother before Marianne was born, stood near the hearth with the tray. At 64, Mrs. Keene had the narrowed eyes of someone who had watched wealthy people make poor decisions for half a century. "Keys have legs in fine houses," she muttered. Marianne looked at her. "What did you say?" "Only that silver spoons never walk until somebody wants soup elsewhere." Marianne almost smiled. It was one of the rare moments of lightness that winter. Then Mrs. Keene set the cup down and lowered her voice. "Your mother used to keep copies." "Copies of what, Mrs.?" Keene's eyes moved toward the corridor. The door stood half open. Footsteps approached. The old servant straightened at once. "Of recipes, my lady." Marianne knew it was a lie. She also knew why Mrs. Keene had told it. Corisande entered. "What recipes?" "Preserves, my lady," Mrs. Keene replied. Lady Marianne was asking about quince. In December, Mrs. Keene gave a solemn nod. "Quince has never respected the calendar." Corisande stared at her. Then she dismissed the servant. Marianne watched the door close. That single unfinished sentence remained with her for 3 years. "Your mother used to keep copies." Copies of what? The answer might have surfaced sooner, if Lord Edmund had been stronger. He was not a cruel father. That fact made his weakness more painful, not less. Cruelty could be resisted. Weakness asked others to excuse it. He loved Marianne in private. He depended upon her in private. He praised her judgment when no one heard. Yet at dinner, when Corisande mocked Marianne's plain gowns, he examined his plate. When Arabella laughed that Marianne smelled of old account books, he rubbed his forehead. When Marianne's name disappeared from invitations, he said, "Society could be thoughtless, not Corisande. Society, not Arabella. Youth, not himself. Peace." He had names for every failure except cowardice. By Marianne's 28th year, Arabella's marriage had become the chief ambition of Valecombe. Corisande spoke of little else. The estate's finances had worsened. London creditors had grown less patient. 2 farms required drainage. A section of the west roof leaked. Lord Edmund had borrowed against future rents. Marianne discovered that last fact accidentally when a solicitor's letter arrived while her father was away. She read only enough to understand the danger. Then she waited for him in the library. Outside, rain struck the windows like thrown gravel. Inside, the fire struggled. When Edmund finally entered, his face already told her that he knew why she was there. "You borrowed £6,000. He removed his gloves. "Marianne, against income the estate has not yet earned. I had expenses. We have expenses every year. Arabella required a London season." Marianne stared at him. £6,000. Not all for Arabella. How much? Edmund moved to the decanter. "How much, father?" He poured brandy. Marianne waited. Silence filled the library. At last he said, "Corisande believed appearances had to be maintained." Marianne looked around at shelves. Her grandfather had built at the carved mantel at portraits of men who had inherited Vailcombe and passed it onward. Appearances. The word seemed obscene. 3 tenant cottages still had leaking roofs. 2 maids had gone without a wage increase for 5 years. The dairy roof required repair. But Arabella had needed Paris silk. Marianne turned away. On the writing table lay a silver tray holding unopened correspondence, a pair of pearl-handled scissors, gloves from London, 2 cards embossed in gold, and a small dish of preserved cherries no one had touched. She looked at those objects and understood more about her family than £6,000 of figures had told her. They were spending substance to preserve surface, not wealth, the appearance of wealth. That evening she argued with Corisande for the first time, not loudly. Marianne rarely raised her voice. Corisande did not either. That made the exchange worse. "Arabella's prospects concern the entire family," Corisande said. "So does insolvency. You use ugly words. Debt remains debt when pronounced beautifully." Corisande's eyes hardened. "A brilliant marriage could repair our position." "With whose money?" "The family's." Marianne's gaze held hers. "Then let the family understand the cost." Corisande stepped closer. "You have always mistaken usefulness for importance." There it was, the thing beneath everything else. Marianne felt it enter her more deeply than an insult shouted before 100 people could have done. Corisande continued, "A woman may keep accounts wonderfully and still have no place in the future of a house. Arabella can secure that future by marrying money, by marrying rank. And if she does, neither," Corisande smiled. "She will." Within the month came news that the Duke of Ravenshade would return to England after a long absence managing family affairs abroad and in the north. He was 36, unmarried, rich, possessor of 2 great estates. More important to Corisande, he had recently inherited additional property from an unmarried uncle. The first letter mentioning him changed Vailcombe overnight. Curtains were beaten, silver was polished, guest rooms were opened. Arabella acquired 2 new evening gowns, despite Marianne's warning that the household account could not support them. Corisande ignored her. "The Duke is expected at Lady Wexford's in February. And we shall be there." Marianne closed the ledger. "You received an invitation," Corisande's expression flickered. "Not yet." That flicker returned to Marianne later. At the time, she merely thought Corisande was being arrogant. Then something stranger happened. A cream envelope arrived at breakfast. The footman handed it to Lord Edmund. Corisande watched. So did Marianne. Edmund broke the seal. His eyes moved over the page, then stopped. "Who is it from?" Arabella asked. Edmund folded the letter. "No one of consequence." Corisande's hand tightened around her teacup. Marianne noticed. Later that morning she passed through the corridor outside her father's study. The door was not fully closed. She heard Corisande's voice. She did not stop deliberately. At least that was what she told herself afterward. "You should never have allowed him to write here." "I cannot prevent a duke from writing to my house," Edmund answered. "You can prevent Marianne from seeing it." Marianne stopped. For several heartbeats, she could hear only the small crackle of fire beyond the door. Then her father said something too softly to understand. Corisande answered sharply. "He remembers her mother." Marianne's breath caught. Edmund said, "He asked only whether Marianne still lived at Vailcombe." "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing yet. Tell him she is unwell. I will not lie." "Then say she dislikes society. That is nearly as false." Corisande lowered her voice. Marianne leaned closer without meaning to. The floorboard beneath her shoe creaked. Inside, the conversation stopped. Marianne stepped back. The study door opened. Corisande stood there. For one terrible moment, neither moved. Then Corisande smiled. "Were you looking for your father?" Marianne could have challenged her. She could have asked what the Duke wanted. She could have demanded the letter. Instead, she said no. "I was going to the estate office." Corisande studied her face. "Of course." Marianne continued down the passage. Her pulse did not settle for several minutes. It was the first time in her life that she consciously pretended ignorance. She disliked the sensation, yet something inside her had changed. For years she had believed her family merely overlooked her. Now she understood that someone had been making certain she remained unseen. Weeks passed. No letter from the Duke reached Marianne. No invitation mentioned her name. Then Corisande announced that Vailcombe would host a winter ball. The expense was impossible. Marianne said so. Her father signed the orders anyway. The night arrived under heavy snow. Carriages crowded the drive. Servants carried cloaks into the entrance hall. Firelight warmed the great rooms, while the gardens beyond the windows lay black and frozen. Marianne had not intended to attend. Corisande changed that. An hour before the first guests arrived, she entered Marianne's room carrying a grey gown. "You will wear this." Marianne looked at it. The dress had belonged to a distant cousin years earlier. "Why?" "Because tonight you must finally join us." The answer was too generous. Marianne knew it at once. She looked toward the older woman. Why Corisande laid the gown on the bed? Must affection always be interrogated, when it arrives after 8 years, perhaps? Corisande gave a small laugh. "You think yourself very clever." "No." Marianne touched the worn sleeve. "Only experienced." She attended. Arabella wore ivory satin. Corisande wore dark velvet. Marianne wore grey. The Duke of Ravenshade arrived shortly after 10. He was taller than Marianne expected, dark-haired, reserved, and almost severe, until one noticed the attentiveness in his eyes. Corisande placed Arabella before him within minutes. Marianne remained near the wall. Then came supper, then dancing, then the moment Corisande had apparently prepared. She summoned Marianne across the ballroom. Guests turned. Arabella smiled. Lord Edmund went pale, and Corisande offered Marianne to the Duke, as though presenting an unsold horse at the end of a market day. The laughter came exactly as she had hoped, but the Duke did not follow the script. "Why have you hidden her from me?" No one answered. For the first time that evening, Marianne looked directly into his face. He was not mocking her. That frightened her more than mockery would have. Because recognition stood in his expression. Not romantic admiration. Something older. Something connected to the cream letter. To her mother. To the locked drawer. Corisande recovered first. "Hidden Marianne." "Your Grace, surely you misunderstand. Marianne dislikes society." The Duke's gaze remained on Marianne. "Does she?" Marianne felt every eye in the ballroom return to her. She could have saved Corisande. For years that had been her instinct. Preserve peace, avoid scandal, protect father, protect Vailcombe. Instead, Marianne said, "I was told society had little use for me." Silence. Her father closed his eyes. Corisande's face did not pass. Only her fingers tightened around her glass. The Duke looked at Lord Edmund. "I wrote to you twice, asking whether Lady Marianne would attend Lady Wexford's gathering." A murmur moved through the room. Marianne turned toward her father. Twice Edmund's lips parted. Corisande answered before he could. Letters are sometimes misplaced. The Duke's expression cooled. Both of them. Another silence. Then Mrs. Keene appeared at the edge of the ballroom. An old servant had no proper reason to enter during dancing, yet she stood there pale, holding something against her apron. Marianne saw it. A small brass key, the same size as the key to the locked-upper drawer in her father's study. Mrs. Keene met her eyes, then looked toward the corridor. Marianne understood. Corisande followed her gaze, and for the first time that night fear entered her face. Marianne slipped away from the ballroom. Behind her, music resumed uncertainly. Ahead lay the dark passage to Lord Edmund's study. The brass key felt cold when Mrs. Keene pressed it into her palm. "Your mother kept copies," the old woman whispered. "Copies of what?" Mrs. Keene looked toward the ballroom doors. "Of the papers Lady Corisande has spent 8 years making certain you never saw." Marianne closed her fingers around the key. At the far end of the corridor, a door opened. Footsteps approached, and Marianne realized that if she entered her father's locked study now, she might finally learn why her family had hidden her from the very man who had been asking to see her. Fun David 1/4 Huang 2, 708 012 2. The footsteps stopped before Marianne could reach the study door. Mrs. Keene caught her wrist. Not yet. Marianne looked at the old woman. The brass key lay inside her closed hand, pressing its teeth into her palm. Not yet, she whispered. Mrs. Keene shook her head. If Lady Coruscant sees you enter with that key, there will be nothing left in the drawer by morning. The footsteps came nearer. Marianne slipped the key into the seam of her glove. A moment later, Arabella appeared around the corner. She had left the ballroom without her usual cluster of admirers. That alone made Marianne wary. "There you are," Arabella said. "Mama wondered where you had gone." "Did she?" Arabella glanced at Mrs. Keene. The old servant lowered her eyes with practiced obedience. "Lady Marianne needed a handkerchief, my lady." From father's corridor, Mrs. Keene did not blink. "Fine linen travels, my lady." For the briefest instant, Marianne feared she might laugh. Arabella did not. She stepped closer. "The Duke is asking for you." Marianne felt the key beneath her glove. "Why?" Arabella's smile became thin. "Perhaps he has discovered another question with which to embarrass us." Us. The word almost astonished Marianne. All evening her family had treated her humiliation as entertainment. Now that the Duke had refused to laugh, suddenly there was an us. Marianne returned to the ballroom. She did not look back at Mrs. Keene. The Duke of Ravenshade stood near the long windows. Lord Edmund was beside him. Coruscant had recovered her composure so completely that only Marianne, who had watched her for 8 years, could see the strain in the set of her shoulders. The Duke inclined his head when Marianne approached. "Lady Marianne, I owe you an apology." A dozen nearby conversations softened. Marianne understood immediately that people were listening. "For what, Your Grace?" "For assuming that my letters had reached their intended destination," Coruscant answered before Marianne could. "Surely we need not turn an unfortunate household error into an entertainment for the room." The Duke looked at her. "Lady Coruscant, I believe the room has already had its entertainment." Silence moved outward from them. Not complete silence. The violins continued near the musicians' gallery. Yet even the music seemed strangely distant. Marianne saw Arabella stiffen. The Duke turned back to Marianne. "I knew your mother when I was young. Not closely. My uncle knew her far better. Before his death he spoke of a matter concerning your family, which he believed should someday be placed before you." Coruscant's face changed, only slightly, but Marianne saw it. So did her father. Lord Edmund stepped forward. "Ravenshade, this is hardly the place." "No," the Duke said. "It is not." He paused. That was the first kindness anyone had shown Marianne that evening. He would not turn her private history into another public spectacle merely because her family had done so. He continued, "If Lady Marianne permits it, I should like to call tomorrow." Coruscant laughed softly. "Tomorrow is inconvenient." Marianne looked at her, for whom the question left her before fear could stop it. Arabella stared. Her father lowered his gaze. Again, that old familiar movement. Marianne felt something inside her settle. Not rage, clarity. The Duke answered as though Coruscant had not spoken. 11 o'clock then." Marianne inclined her head. 11. Coruscant's glass touched the table too sharply. The sound was small, but Marianne heard it. For the first time in her life, she had agreed to something important, without first seeking her father's permission. The sensation was frightening. It was also clean. The ball continued. People danced. People whispered. Marianne did neither. She waited. Nearly an hour passed before she saw Coruscant leave the room. 5 minutes later, Lord Edmund followed. Marianne counted slowly to 100. Then she went downstairs. Not toward the study, toward the servants' hall. The change in temperature struck first. The grand rooms above had been warm with fires, candles, bodies, wine. Below stairs, the stone passages held the winter. Kitchen heat gathered only near the ovens. Mrs. Keene stood beside a wooden table with 2 housemaids, a footman, and Mr. Hales, the butler. Conversation stopped when Marianne entered. Nobody pretended otherwise. They knew. The servants always knew, often before the family. Marianne closed the door behind her. "Mrs. Keene," the old woman stepped forward. "My lady, you said my mother kept copies." "Yes." Where Mrs. Keene looked toward Mr. Hales. The butler was nearly 70. He had served Marianne's grandfather. His back had bent in recent years, but dignity still sat upon him like an old coat, made perfectly to measure. "Mr. Hales spoke. Her ladyship entrusted certain papers to me after you were born." Marianne stared at him. "To you, not because I was important, because I was not." The word struck her. Hales continued. "Important men have cabinets searched. Important ladies have writing desks opened. Nobody asks what an old butler has kept behind a row of boot-polish tins." One of the young maids bit her lip. Mrs. Keene gave Hales a look. He raised one eyebrow. That counted as the second moment of humor the servants had given Marianne that winter. She needed it more than she expected. "Where are the papers now?" Marianne asked. "Gone." The warmth left her. Gone. Hales nodded. 3 months after Lady Corisande came to Valecombe, someone searched my room. Were they stolen? Some were. Some I had already moved. Where Hales looked at Mrs. Keene again. Marianne almost lost patience. "Please." Mrs. Keene reached into the pocket of her apron. "Not the papers." A folded scrap. She placed it on the table. Marianne opened it. Her mother's handwriting. She knew it instantly. 3 lines remained torn from a larger sheet. "For Marianne upon her 25th year, whether I am living or dead, Edmund must not be persuaded that the settlement may be altered by convenience. Mr. Vaux, Bell must retain." The sentence ended. Marianne read it twice, then a third time. Settlement. What settlement? Hales shook his head. "We were never told the full contents. Mr. Bell." "A solicitor in London," Mrs. Keene said. "He handled matters for your mother's family. Is he living? I do not know." Marianne looked down at the fragment. Upon her 25th year. She was 29 now, 4 years late. Why did nobody give this to me? Pain crossed Mrs. Keene's face. "Because by the time you turned 25, my lady, your father, had dismissed Mr. Bell's name as a misunderstanding. Lady Corisande said there was no settlement. Then your letters began going missing." "My letters?" Hales spoke quietly. "More than one." Marianne felt the room tilt, not physically, something worse. The shape of her past changed. She thought of invitations that never came, proposals that cooled without explanation, an old friend who had once stopped writing, a distant aunt whose Christmas notes had ended. The Duke's letters. How many? Hales hesitated. "I cannot say. How many did you see?" 7 or 8 over the years. Marianne could barely speak. "Addressed to me. Some. Others to your father concerning you." She looked at Mrs. Keene. "You knew. Not all of it, but enough to worry." Marianne folded the paper carefully. This was not neglect. It was not thoughtlessness. It had method. Years of method. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Everyone fell silent. Hales reached for the scrap. Marianne shook her head and slipped it beneath her sleeve. The door opened. Lord Edmund entered. His face seemed older than it had upstairs. Marianne dismissed the others with a glance. No one moved at first. That told her something too. The servants were not merely curious. They were afraid for her. "Go," she said. Mrs. Keene obeyed last. The door closed. Father and daughter stood alone. Edmund looked toward the hearth. "You should not be here." It was almost absurd. Marianne stared at him. Of all the things he could say, he had chosen that. "Did Mother leave a dormant for me?" His shoulders sagged. "Who told you?" "Answer me." Edmund moved toward a chair. Marianne did not let him hide in it. "Father." He stopped. "There was an arrangement." "What arrangement?" "Your mother had property from her family. How much I do not remember the exact figures." "You remember figures when creditors call." He flinched. Marianne regretted the cruelty for half a second, then remembered 7 or 8 missing letters. "How much?" "Several £1,000s. Investments. A small income. Possibly a cottage held separately. Possibly. The documents were complicated, and I suppose Corisande understood them better than I did." Marianne watched him. There, the first opening. "What did she tell you?" that your mother's arrangements were temporary, that certain sums could be reinvested for the benefit of the household. Could they? Edmund said nothing. Marianne's heartbeat slowed. She had worked with ledgers long enough to recognize avoidance. Not proof, but avoidance. Did you use my money? Edmund's face turned grey. For Vailcombe, that is not what I asked. For the family, did you use my money? Yes, the word was barely audible. Marianne closed her eyes. Not because she was weak, because she suddenly remembered being 22 and refusing a new winter cloak after her father said the estate was strained. She remembered wearing her mother's old boots beneath long skirts. She remembered paying a tenant widow's medicine from her own tiny allowance because the estate could not spare £3, all while money left to her may have been paying for something else. How much remains I do not know. That answer hurt more than the first. Marianne opened her eyes. You do not know. Corisande handled much of it. You allowed her. I was trying to keep the house together. No, Edmund stared. Marianne's voice remained quiet. You were trying to keep the appearance of the house together. The distinction left him speechless. For the first time, Marianne did not rescue him from his shame. She walked away. At breakfast the next morning, Corisande announced that the Duke had sent regrets. Marianne looked up. Regrets? He cannot call today. Arabella buttered toast without looking at her. A message arrived early. May I see it? Corisande smiled. Surely you do not doubt me. Marianne thought of the torn paper inside her dress pocket. I doubt everyone this morning. Lord Edmund nearly dropped his spoon. Corisande's smile remained. How dramatic. The table between them displayed winter abundance, meant to impress the remaining guests. Smoked ham, soft eggs, hot rolls, marmalade preserved plums, honey-thick cream seed cake, and silver pots of coffee. Marianne looked at it differently now. Expense. Display. Debt arranged beautifully upon porcelain. She stood. Where are you going? To ask the footman whether a message arrived. Corisande's face hardened. Sit down. No. The word produced a silence, unlike any Marianne had known at Vailcombe. Her father looked at her. Arabella stopped eating. Corisande set down her cup. Marianne left. The footman had received no message from Ravenshade. Neither had Hales. At 11:30 a groom arrived from the village inn. He carried a note. Not from the Duke. From his secretary. The Duke had been called unexpectedly toward London before dawn after receiving a telegram. Marianne stopped herself. No, not a telegram. A messenger had come by horse with urgent correspondence from London requiring the Duke's immediate departure. Yet the secretary had included something else. His Grace regretted leaving before speaking with Lady Marianne and requested that she contact Mr. Safe. Nathaniel Bell, Solicitor, Chancery Lane, London. Bell, the name from her mother's paper. Marianne read the note twice. Then Corisande took it from her hand. How curious. Give it back. Corisande folded it. London is hardly a place for a woman to chase old misunderstandings alone. Who said I would be alone? Your father will not permit this. Marianne looked toward Edmund. He had entered behind them. For once his eyes did not fall, but neither did he speak. Corisande waited. Marianne waited too. The struggle between them was no longer hidden. Edmund rubbed his brow. Perhaps, he said, we should let these old matters rest. Marianne felt something inside her break. Not her affection, something more useful, her expectation. She no longer expected him to choose her. That made the next choice easier. By afternoon her allowance was suspended. Corisande called it necessary economy. Marianne's access to the estate books was also removed. The study locks were changed. Mrs. Keene was dismissed, officially for insolence. In truth, because Corisande had discovered the missing key. The dismissal happened before the entire household. Mrs. Keene was given 2 hours to leave. Snow had begun outside. Marianne found her in the servants' passage, tying a shawl around her shoulders. You cannot go out in this weather. I have survived 64 English winters, my lady. That does not make the 65th pleasant. Mrs. Keene smiled. No. Only less surprising. Marianne pressed £3 into her hand, nearly everything she possessed in cash. The servant tried to refuse. Marianne closed her fingers over it. Take it. Mrs. Keene's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Instead, she leaned close. Go to Bell. I intend to. Do not write ahead. Why? Because letters have been disappearing from Valecombe for years. Marianne nodded. Then Mrs. Keene added something more. Your mother did not trust only one place. What does that mean? The old woman looked toward the half-open door leading into the upper corridor. Voices drifted from beyond. Corisande, Arabella. Marianne raised one finger. They listened. It was the same treacherous architecture of the house that had concealed whispers for years. Now it betrayed the people who depended upon secrecy. Corisande's voice came clearly. She must not reach Bell before we do, Arabella answered. What can he prove enough? There was fear in Corisande's voice now, real fear. The settlement was one thing. The correspondence is worse. What correspondence? A pause. Then Corisande said, The letters from Ravenshade's uncle. Marianne held perfectly still. Arabella lowered her voice, but the doorway carried it. What was in them? A promise. What sort of promise? Another pause. A promise your mother was never supposed to discover. Mrs. Keene's hand found Marianne's. Then footsteps moved toward the door. They separated immediately. Marianne climbed the back stairs. Her heart hammered. Not from terror, from direction. For years, others had known pieces of her life. Corisande, her father, the servants, the Duke, a dead uncle, a solicitor in London. Everyone seemed to possess a fragment except Marianne herself. That ended now. She packed before dinner. Not gowns. Useful things. 2 dresses, stockings, her mother's small sewing case, a notebook, 3 pencils, the scrap of handwriting, the Duke's secretary's note, and copies Marianne had secretly made over the previous year of several estate accounts that had never seemed correct. She had begun copying them before understanding why. Now she was grateful for her own suspicion. At midnight, Lord Edmund came to her room. Her case stood beside the bed. He saw it. You mean to leave? Yes. Corisande will say you are behaving irrationally. Marianne almost smiled. She has been saying that in smaller ways for years. London is expensive. I know. You have almost no money. I know that too. He looked at the case. How will you live? Marianne answered without hesitation. By working. His shock might have amused her once. A daughter of Valecombe. She looked at him. A daughter of Valecombe has already worked for years. You simply chose not to call it work when you did not have to pay her. Edmund sat heavily. Silence filled the room. Marianne turned toward the window. Snow covered the garden. Beyond it stood the dark fields whose rents she had calculated, whose repairs she had scheduled, whose people had come to her because she listened. Valecombe had been her home. But home was not merely the place one loved. It was the place where one's existence was permitted to have weight. For the first time in her life, Marianne wondered whether she had ever truly possessed that here. Her father spoke behind her. There is something else. She turned. Edmund looked frightened. Not ashamed. Frightened. The settlement your mother left was larger than I told you. How much larger I never knew the final value. Father, there were investments, land, income from property near London. Marianne stared, and Corisande controlled it. Not legally. The distinction was immediate. Marianne stepped closer. What does that mean? Edmund rubbed both hands over his face. It means papers were presented to me. Transfers. Instructions. I signed things I should have read more carefully. The room seemed to contract. Did you forge my name? No. Did Corisande? I do not know. That was not enough. Marianne opened her notebook. Tell me every document you remember. Edmund stared at her. Now. Now. For nearly an hour he spoke. Not clearly, not bravely, but he spoke. Names, amounts, banks, a property, a solicitor who had visited once and never returned. A London address Corisande had claimed was irrelevant. Marianne wrote everything. When he finished, she had 4 pages, and one name appeared 3 times. Nathaniel Bell. At dawn, Marianne left Valecombe through the front door. Corisande tried to stop that. If you insist upon disgracing yourself, she said, you may at least leave privately. Marianne looked toward the servants' entrance, the narrow door through which unwanted staff were dismissed. Then she looked at the great oak doors before her. No. Corisande's face tightened. You have no position outside this house. Perhaps not. No husband? No fortune? Perhaps not. No useful acquaintance in London. Marianne took her gloves from Hales. That remains to be seen. Corisande leaned nearer. When you fail, do not expect Vailcombe to receive you back. Marianne met her eyes. If I return, it will not be to ask permission to enter. The great doors opened. Cold air struck her face. Snow had stopped, but the road was white. A hired carriage waited beyond the steps. Hales had arranged it quietly. Marianne climbed inside. She did not weep as Vailcombe disappeared behind bare trees. She watched until the last chimney vanished. Then she opened her notebook. London first. Bell first. Truth first. 3 days later, she stood in Chancery Lane beneath a grey sky, tired from travel, and wearing the same old winter coat her family had once considered an embarrassment. The city frightened her. Carriages crowded the street. Men moved quickly. Shop windows glowed against the cold. Nobody knew her name. Strangely, that comforted her. She found the address. Bell and Harcourt Solicitors. The brass plate was old. Marianne climbed the stairs. A clerk looked up. Mr. Nathaniel Bell. The young man's expression changed. Mr. Bell died 2 years ago. Marianne's hope fell. But before she could speak, the clerk added, his son manages the firm now. Marianne exhaled. May I see him? Your name, Lady Marianne Vailcombe. The clerk froze, then stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. He disappeared through an inner door. Marianne heard muffled voices. Another door opened. A man of perhaps 35 entered. Dark coat, ink on one finger, an expression of disbelief. Lady Marianne. Yes. He stared at her as though she had stepped out of a grave. My father spent years trying to find you. Marianne could not speak. The solicitor crossed the room and closed the door. Then he opened a cabinet. From its deepest shelf he removed a narrow wooden box. It bore her mother's initials. The same initials Marianne had seen embroidered inside the sewing case she carried in her luggage. Mr. Bell placed the box on the desk. My father left strict instructions. Marianne looked at him. What instructions? That if Lady Marianne Vailcombe ever walked into this office of her own free will, this was to be given to her before anyone at Vailcombe could learn she had come. He produced a key. Marianne felt the room go utterly still, not because she had found her fortune. She did not yet know whether there was one. Not because she had defeated Corisande. She had not. But because for the first time in her life, somebody had preserved something for Marianne herself. Bell turned the key. Inside lay several bundles of letters, a ledger, a sealed legal copy, and on top of them all, an envelope bearing the handwriting of the late Duke of Ravenshade's uncle. Across its front were 6 words, for Marianne Vailcombe when she is free. Marianne reached for it. Before her fingers touched the envelope, the office door opened. The clerk stood there breathless. Mr. Bell, there is a gentleman downstairs, demanding to know whether Lady Marianne has arrived. Bell's face hardened. Who? The clerk swallowed. A man sent from Vailcombe, and Marianne understood that Corisande had moved faster than she expected. Phần đã viết 2, 4 khoảng 5,30, 8, 12 từ Mr. Bell closed the wooden box, not hurriedly, carefully. That frightened Marianne more. Who sent him? She asked. The clerk shook his head. He gave no name. Only said he came on behalf of Lord Edmund Vailcombe and insisted upon speaking with Lady Marianne at once. Bell looked at Marianne. Did your father know you were coming here? Yes. Did Lady Corisande? She knew I meant to come to London. She did not know when. Bell stood. Then we shall assume she knows now. Marianne looked at the box. What should I do? Nothing dramatic. Bell moved toward the office door. That disappointed something newly awakened inside her. Nothing, he looked back. Nothing visible. That was different. He instructed the clerk to send the gentleman upstairs. Then Bell returned to his desk and removed every important document from the box. The sealed copy went into one drawer, the ledger into another, the bundles of letters into a leather case. The envelope from Ravenshade's uncle he handed to Marianne. Hide this. Where? On your person. Marianne slipped it beneath the inner fastening of her bodice. Bell put several worthless papers into the wooden box instead. Old invoices, cancelled notices, a dried ribbon. He closed the lid again. A moment later the door opened. The visitor was not someone Marianne expected. Mr. Caro, Vailcombe's steward. He stopped when he saw her. "My lady." Marianne remained seated. "Mr. Caro." Bell stood beside the desk. "You wish to speak with Lady Marianne." Caro removed his hat. "Lord Edmund sent me." "Did he?" Marianne's voice remained mild. Caro hesitated. "He wishes you to return home. My father knows where I am staying." The steward's eyes moved toward Bell. Corisande had taught him to lie better than that. Marianne noticed. "Perhaps your father was concerned. Concern is often improved by accurate information." Bell coughed softly. Caro's jaw tightened. "Lady Marianne, you should not involve yourself in matters you do not understand." For the first time in her life, Marianne nearly enjoyed an insult, because this one had arrived too late. "I have managed the estate accounts for years, Mr. Caro. Household accounts are not legal affairs." "No, but missing tenant payments are." His face changed, only slightly. "Enough," Marianne continued, "and altered balances." His eyes hardened. Bell interrupted. "If you have a message from Lord Edmund, deliver it." Caro took a folded paper from his coat. Marianne recognized her father's handwriting. She opened it. "Come home before this becomes impossible to repair." Nothing more. No apology. No explanation. No warning. Only repair. Marianne folded the note. "Tell my father I am safe." Caro did not move. "And Lady Corisande tell her nothing." The steward's mouth tightened again. Then he looked toward the wooden box. Bell noticed. So did Marianne. Caro left. The moment the outer door closed, Bell turned to the clerk. "Follow him." The young man blinked. "Sir," at a sensible distance. The clerk brightened. Immediately, Bell looked at Marianne. "That boy has been praying for excitement since he entered articles." Marianne almost smiled. Almost. Then Bell became serious again. "Now." He opened the leather case. "We begin properly." The first document was her mother's marriage settlement. Bell did not bury her in legal language. He explained only what mattered. Property from Marianne's maternal family had been preserved separately. Some income was intended for Marianne. A larger sum was to become available when she reached 25. A small house outside London had also been held through trustees for her future use. "Could my father spend it?" Marianne asked. "Not as he pleased." "Could Corisande?" "Certainly not." Bell placed one finger on a page. "And there is something more troubling." Marianne leaned closer. Several instructions were later submitted claiming that Lady Marianne wished certain income redirected temporarily for the benefit of Vailcombe. "I signed no such thing, I know." "How? Because one bears your name. Dated during a winter when my father recorded that you were staying at Vailcombe." "I was there." Bell opened another file. "Yet the witness claims it was signed in London." Marianne stared. Someone had used her name. Not once. 3 times. The room became silent. She thought of Corisande standing beside the locked desk, of changed keys, of missing letters, of her father signing papers he had not read. This was no longer simply cruelty. It was structure, money, access, silence, all connected. Bell showed her the ledger. Amounts had moved from her income toward household expenses, then toward payments to London merchants, then toward a private account associated with Corisande. Not every sum could yet be traced. Enough could. How much? Bell gave the figure carefully. Marianne sat back. It was more money than she had imagined owning, more than enough to have prevented every humiliating economy of the last years. Her old gowns, her tiny allowance, the leaking tenant roofs, Mrs. Keene leaving through snow with £3 in her pocket. Marianne did not cry. She looked at the numbers. That was what she knew how to do. She copied each amount into her notebook. Bell watched. Most people would ask what they could buy with it. Marianne kept writing. "I want to know where it went." For the first time that morning, Bell smiled. "Good. Then we shall find out." They worked until evening. The letter from Ravenshade's uncle remained unopened until last. Marianne held it for nearly a minute. "Why did he write to me?" Bell folded his hands. "Read it." She broke the seal. The letter was old. The handwriting firm. The late Duke's uncle explained that Marianne's mother had once helped his younger brother through a scandal involving debt and family disgrace. Not romantically, quietly. She had persuaded her own relatives to purchase a small obligation and prevent public ruin. Years later, he repaid the sum into an investment intended for Marianne, a gesture of gratitude, not charity, not courtship, a debt of honor. Corisande had apparently discovered correspondence referring to that arrangement and hidden it. Near the end of the letter came the sentence that explained the Duke's interest. My nephew knows only that Marianne Valcombe was intended to receive what was preserved for her, and that silence within her household has prevented it. If she remains ignorant after my death, he is to ask why. Marianne lowered the page. Why they had hidden her. Now she understood. The Duke had not entered the ballroom already enchanted by her. He had entered suspicious. He knew something had been concealed. Her family had offered Marianne to him as a joke. They had not known that he arrived carrying a question older than the humiliation. Bell gathered the papers. We have evidence. Enough to expose them. Enough to begin. Marianne looked disappointed. Bell raised one hand. Evidence is not the same as a performance, Lady Marianne. She thought of the ballroom, of laughter, of Corisande's smile. I have had enough performances. Good. Then we build something that survives one. That sentence remained with her. Marianne did not return to Valcombe. She rented a small room above a widow's lodging house in Bloomsbury. The room contained a bed, a washstand, one chair, a narrow table, and a fireplace that consumed coal with an appetite greater than her purse allowed. At first London felt like punishment. Cold corridors, wet hems, cheap meals, smoke, noise. She had gone from a country house with 30 rooms to one room in which she could touch nearly everything without rising from her chair. Yet something changed. No one entered without knocking. No one opened her letters. No one decided which invitations she could see. No one told her that money did not concern her. It was poverty of comfort, not poverty of control. For the first time in her life, Marianne understood the difference. Bell helped her obtain temporary work, not through pity, through usefulness. A widow who owned 3 small rental houses needed someone to put years of neglected accounts in order. Marianne did it in 6 days. A shopkeeper's sister needed help tracing unpaid invoices. Marianne found the errors in 2 afternoons. Then a charitable dispensary required someone to organize subscriptions, expenses, and receipts. She accepted. The work was not fashionable. That made it valuable. Nobody cared whether her gown was 3 seasons old, if the columns balanced. Nobody asked whether she was marriageable before asking whether she could add. Her hands grew rougher from cold. Her boots wore thin. She learned where bread was cheapest near closing time. She learned which omnibus route saved a walk in rain. She learned how long one candle would last if trimmed properly. The knowledge humbled her. It also strengthened her. Weeks passed, then months. Bell continued, tracing money. Mrs. Keane came to London and found work with a respectable widow near Russell Square. Mr. Hales remained at Valcombe. Through him, information travelled quietly, not letters addressed directly to Marianne. Corisande watched those. Messages moved through Bell's clerk, sometimes through tradesmen, sometimes through a seamstress who had a cousin in the Valcombe kitchens. Truth climbed upward from the people no one thought important. Caro grew nervous. Corisande grew harsher. Arabella's prospects worsened. The Duke of Ravenshade did not return to Valcombe. That, according to Hales, caused the greatest panic. Corisande had expected to repair the ballroom disaster by attaching Arabella to him. Instead, the Duke remained in London. He called upon Marianne once. At Bell's office. Never alone, never secretly. He brought copies of his uncle's correspondence. Marianne studied them. One letter referred to her maternal property. Another referred to repeated unanswered inquiries. A third mentioned concern that Lady Marianne may be prevented from receiving ordinary correspondence. The Duke watched her read. I am sorry. For what? For not understanding sooner. You were not responsible. No. He paused. But I could have asked more directly. Marianne looked at him. My father could have answered more directly. That ended the subject. She respected him for allowing it to end. He did not rescue her. He became useful. There was a difference. He introduced Bell to a former manager, familiar with one of the London properties tied to Marianne's settlement. The man remembered Coruscant visiting years earlier. He also remembered Caro. That mattered. Another piece joined the others. Then came the first failure. Bell petitioned for access to certain records needed to confirm the transfers. The request became known. Coruscant moved immediately. Documents disappeared. A bank clerk suddenly remembered less than before. Caro denied ever visiting London on estate business. One witness refused to speak. Then Arabella became engaged. Not to the Duke, to Sir Percival Strake, heir to a wealthy industrial fortune recently trying to enter older society. Coruscant announced a grand engagement celebration at Valecombe. The invitations travelled everywhere. London, the counties. Families who had laughed at Marianne, families who had whispered afterward. The celebration was to do more than honour Arabella. It was to restore Coruscant. Bell laid the invitation on his desk. "You received one no." He turned it over. Neither did the Duke. Marianne looked at the card. Heavy cream paper, gold edge, Arabella Valecombe, and Sir Percival Strake. At the bottom in smaller script, guests were invited to witness the signing of certain marriage arrangements concerning future property. Marianne read it twice. Future property. Bell saw the same thing. Which property? He pulled another document from the file. Marianne already knew. Valecombe had little unencumbered property left. Unless Coruscant intended to use something that was not hers. Bell sent inquiries. 3 days later the answer came. A portion of land and income connected to Marianne's settlement was being represented as available for Arabella's marriage arrangements. Marianne felt strangely calm. They were doing it again. Not hiding the past now. Using it. Why would Coruscant risk that? She asked. Bell answered, "Because she believes you cannot stop her in time." The Duke stood near the window. Or because she believes Marianne will not return publicly. That was the challenge. Coruscant knew Marianne. Or thought she did. The Marianne who avoided scenes. The Marianne who protected her father. The Marianne who endured humiliation to spare the household scandal. That woman had left Valecombe in snow. Marianne looked down at the invitation, then at her notebook. Months of copied figures filled it now. Her own earnings, the settlement records, transfers, witness names, dates, Caro's discrepancies, her father's recollections, her mother's fragment, the late uncle's letters. Nothing miraculous. Nothing sudden. Work. Only work. She closed the notebook. We let her proceed. Bell frowned. To the signing. Yes. If we warn her now, she changes the arrangement. The Duke understood first. You want her to declare openly that the property belongs to the family. Marianne nodded. Before witnesses, Bell leaned back. Risky, but useful. Marianne looked at him. Can it be done without lying? Yes. Then we do it. For the first time in her life, she was not merely defending herself. She was setting the board. The next weeks required patience. Marianne returned briefly to a village near Valecombe, not the estate. A market town several miles away. She stayed at a small inn where nobody bowed deeply and nobody cared which daughter of an earl she was. The innkeeper's wife allowed Marianne to help with accounts in exchange for reduced lodging. Marianne spent mornings checking suppliers, afternoons meeting former tenants, evenings recording what they remembered. Mr. Ames came, the same tenant whose missing payment Marianne had once found. He removed his cap repeatedly until she told him to keep it on. He brought receipts, 3 years of them. 2 did not match Caro's books. A dairy widow brought another. Then a blacksmith. Small discrepancies, not dramatic alone. Together, a pattern. Money had been skimmed before entering official estate accounts. Some of it had concealed withdrawals elsewhere. Caro was not merely Coruscant's messenger. He had benefited. Marianne returned to London with copies. Bell looked through them. This changes things. How Caro may turn. Marianne frowned. Why? Because Coruscant can survive social embarrassment better than he can survive being blamed for every missing pound. They sent no threat, only a request. Caro ignored it. Then Bell sent a second, this time including 3 figures only. Caro arrived the next morning. He looked ill, not sick, cornered. I did what I was instructed to do. Belle said nothing. Marianne did. "By whom you know, say it." Caro stared at her. "Lady Corisande, and my father. Sometimes he signed, knowing." Caro looked away. Sometimes not. There was the cowardice again, but not equal guilt. Marianne forced herself to keep distinctions clear. "Did Corisande instruct you to alter my settlement accounts?" "Yes." "Did she instruct you to redirect letters?" "Yes." "Did she instruct you to destroy records?" Caro hesitated. Belle reached for the papers. Caro spoke quickly. "Yes." Silence filled the office. The Duke, present at Belle's request, did not move. Marianne's hands remained folded. Caro looked at her. "You do not understand what she is capable of." Marianne thought of Mrs. Keen in snow. "I understand more than you think." Caro swallowed. "She will deny everything. Then you must decide whether you intend to lie beside her." His face changed. That was the choice. Marianne gave him no comfort, no promise, no forgiveness. Belle prepared a statement. Caro refused to sign. For 10 minutes, then 15, he walked to the window. Returned. "Read the first page again." His hand trembled. At last he signed. 1 page, then another, then a third. The trap tightened. Yet Corisande still had one move. 2 days before the engagement celebration, Lord Edmund arrived in London. He came to Marianne's lodging house, not Belle's office, not Ravenshade House, her narrow room. He stood inside it and looked at the small fire, the plain table, the repaired cuffs of Marianne's dress. His face broke. "You live here, I work here." He saw the account books, the stack of receipts, the jar holding her pencils. He sat. "Corisande knows you have Caro." Marianne became still. "How?" "I do not know." "What has she done?" Edmund looked at his hands. "She says if you return to Valecombe, she will declare you unstable." Marianne almost laughed. Not from amusement. Recognition. There it was. The old weapon. A woman asking questions could be called difficult. A woman refusing control could be called irrational. A woman speaking publicly could be called unwell. Edmund continued. "She has already begun telling people London has changed you, that you have become fixated on money, that you imagine conspiracies." Marianne's stomach tightened. Belle had warned her this might come. Knowing did not make it painless. Her father looked at her. "Do not go." She stared. "You came here to stop me. I came to protect you." "No." Marianne stood. "You came because you are afraid of what happens if I speak." He flinched. She softened only slightly. "Father, I do not need you to save me." He looked older than ever. "Then what do you need?" The answer came immediately. "Tell the truth." Silence. The fire shifted. Outside wheels rolled through wet streets. Edmund's eyes filled with fear. "Publicly, yes." "Before everyone?" "Yes." He shook his head. "I cannot." Marianne closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, expectation was gone. "Then do not." He looked stunned. She continued, "But do not stand against me." He left, without promising either way. The morning of Arabella's engagement celebration arrived under a hard winter sky. Marianne dressed plainly, dark blue wool, clean gloves. No borrowed jewels, no attempt to appear richer than she was. Belle carried the documents. Caro travelled separately. Mrs. Keen and Mr. Hales had both agreed to speak if required. The Duke would attend because Sir Percival's family had invited him independently, hoping for his prestige. Corisande had not known he accepted. That was deliberate. Marianne travelled first to the village, then toward Valecombe. The road was the same one she had taken away in snow. The hedges were bare, the fields grey. When the carriage reached the estate gates, she felt fear at last. Real fear, not of losing money, of becoming again the woman who had once stood silent beneath laughter. She pressed one hand over her notebook, then remembered what the last months had given her. Work, witnesses, choice. For the first time in her life, Valecombe looked smaller from the carriage window than it had in memory. The house came into view. Carriages filled the drive. Guests had already arrived. The same world, the same kind of people, the same windows glowing against winter. Marianne descended. The front doors stood open. A footman stared, then bowed. Inside, music drifted from the ballroom. Marianne handed over her cloak. Hales appeared at the far end of the hall. Their eyes met. He gave the smallest nod. Everything was ready. Almost. Then Belle entered behind her. The Duke came next, and finally from another carriage Caro stepped onto the drive holding the statement he had signed. Marianne turned toward the ballroom doors. Beyond them, Corisande was preparing to place Marianne's property into Arabella's future before the very society that had once laughed, while Marianne was offered away as a humiliation. This time, however, Marianne had not come to be offered. She had come to make Corisande choose between admitting the truth and lying before witnesses who could finally prove it. The ballroom doors opened. Every conversation stopped, and at the far end of the room, Corisande slowly rose from her chair. Von David 3, 4, Huang Su, Komani, Otte Toll to Corisande did not speak at first. That frightened Marianne more than anger would have. The ballroom was nearly the same as it had been on the night of her humiliation. Different flowers, different musicians, different arrangements of chairs, but the same chandeliers burned overhead. The same polished floor reflected candlelight. The same tall windows held the winter darkness outside, and many of the same faces had returned. Lady Wexford stood near the card tables. Sir Percival Strake's mother occupied a gilt chair beside Arabella. Two gentlemen who had laughed when Corisande offered Marianne to the Duke now stared openly from beside the fireplace. Marianne saw recognition move through the room, then whispering. It began softly. "Lady Marianne." She came back. "With Ravenshade. Is that Belle?" The solicitor, Corisande, heard every word. Her expression remained composed. Only her left hand betrayed her. It tightened around the fan resting at her waist. Arabella rose. She looked beautiful, ivory again. Perhaps Corisande believed certain colors could rewrite memories. Marianne remembered the first ball, the old grey gown, the laughter, her father looking down. This time Marianne wore no jewels except her mother's small brooch. She did not need armor borrowed from wealth. She had brought something better: records, witnesses, her own voice. Sir Percival stepped forward first. "Lady Marianne." He sounded uncertain whether he should bow. Marianne spared him the decision by inclining her head. "Sir Percival." Corisande finally spoke. "How unexpected." Marianne looked at her. Was it? A hush spread. Not silence yet, but close. Corisande smiled. "After your recent difficulties in London, I had hoped you would avoid further strain." There it was, the first stone laid for the story Corisande had prepared. Marianne unstable, Marianne distressed, Marianne changed. Marianne smiled faintly. "London has been very instructive, I am sure." Corisande's tone softened in a way Marianne now recognized as danger. "You have been working, I hear." Several guests glanced at one another. A noblewoman working. Corisande intended the word to humiliate. Marianne let it stand. "Yes." "Doing what accounts." Another murmur. Corisande tilted her head. "How exhausting for you." "Not particularly." Marianne looked toward Belle. The solicitor remained near the entrance. Still, patient. Corisande followed her gaze, then saw Caro. For the first time, color left her face. The change was so brief most people missed it. Marianne did not. Neither did the Duke. Sir Percival's father rose from his chair. "Perhaps someone should explain why a solicitor and the Veilcombe steward are attending my son's engagement celebration." Belle answered, "I shall be pleased to do so when the appropriate moment arrives." Corisande laughed. "This is absurd." "Then let us avoid absurdity," Marianne said. "Continue with the signing." Arabella turned sharply. "What the marriage arrangements?" Marianne looked toward the long table prepared near the musicians. Papers lay there, 2 silver inkstands, fresh quills, wax, a small stack of legal copies. The theatre was ready. Corisande studied Marianne. "You have no concern in those arrangements. Then signing them should present no difficulty." Silence. The room finally became completely still. Not one guest laughed. Corisande walked toward Marianne. Her voice fell low. "You should leave." "No, you do not understand what you are doing." "For years," Marianne said quietly, "that has been everyone's favorite explanation for keeping me ignorant." Corisande's jaw tightened. Then Sir Percival's father intervened. "Lady Corisande, if there is some dispute concerning property connected with my son's marriage, I would prefer to know it before any document is signed." That was the first crack. Not from Marianne, from someone Corisande needed. Corisande turned toward him. "There is no dispute," Bell spoke. "Then you will have no objection to identifying the property listed in the second schedule." Corisande stared. Bell walked toward the table. A servant moved uncertainly aside. He lifted one of the documents. Sir Percival's father came closer. The Duke followed. Guests began gathering around them. Corisande tried to recover control. "This is a private family matter." The Duke's voice cut across the room. "You made Lady Marianne's place in this family a public amusement here once before." Every face turned toward him. He continued, "It would be peculiar to demand privacy only when the facts become inconvenient." No one breathed. Marianne remembered the laughter from the first night. The Duke had not forgotten either. Corisande's eyes flashed. "Your Grace, surely you are not suggesting—" "I am suggesting nothing." He looked toward Marianne. "Lady Marianne has asked only that the documents be read before they are signed." Sir Percival turned to Arabella. "Did you know there was a dispute?" Arabella looked at her mother. That answer was enough. Corisande moved to the table. "The land is Valacombe property." Bell opened his case. "Which land?" "The South Holdings." "Name them." Corisande's face hardened. "This interrogation is intolerable." Bell remained calm. "Blackthorn Field. 2 cottages near Harrogate Lane. Income derived from the property known as Willow House." Marianne felt the words settle through the room. Willow House. The small property mentioned in her settlement. Corisande answered too quickly. "Family assets." Bell removed a sealed copy. "No." The word was simple. It carried farther than shouting. He placed the document on the table. These assets formed part of a settlement created through Lady Marianne's maternal family. Corisande laughed. "Old arrangements, altered years ago." "By whom?" Bell asked it softly. Corisande hesitated. "By Lord Edmund." Everyone looked toward Marianne's father. He stood near the rear of the ballroom. Marianne had not seen him when she entered. Perhaps he had been there from the beginning. Perhaps she had deliberately avoided looking. Now there was nowhere else for either of them to turn. Corisande spoke louder. "Edmund, tell them." He did not move. "Tell them the property was transferred for family use." Edmund's face had the grey weariness Marianne had seen in her London room. Corisande took a step toward him. "Edmund." Marianne felt old instinct rising. "Protect him. Give him time. Say something that classed him." She did not. The room waited. Edmund looked at his daughter, then at Corisande. His voice came rough. "I signed documents." Corisande exhaled. "There." But Edmund continued. "I did not have the authority I allowed myself to believe I had." Corisande froze. The room seemed to contract around her. Edmund swallowed. "And some documents were placed before me after I had been told Marianne had agreed to the arrangements." Marianne did not move. Corisande's eyes became cold. "You are confused." "No." For once Edmund said, "I am trying not to be." That was the first time he had stood between Marianne and the easier lie. It came years late, but it came. Corisande turned immediately to the guests. "Lord Edmund has been under considerable pressure." Bell opened another paper. "Then perhaps Mr. Carow can assist." The steward looked as though he wished the floor would open beneath him. Marianne almost pitied him. Almost. Bell gestured. Carow stepped forward. Corisande's voice sharpened. "You are my husband's servant." Carow looked at her. "I served the estate, then remember your place." He did. That was precisely why his next words mattered. "My place allowed me to see things the family did not." A murmur moved through the servants standing near the ballroom doors. Marianne thought of Mrs. Keene, of Hales, of kitchen whispers and copied receipts. Truth had risen from below, exactly as Corisande had always feared. Carow continued. "Lady Corisande instructed me to redirect correspondence addressed to Lady Marianne." Corisande laughed once. "Nonsense." Carow's hands trembled. "She instructed me to alter figures transferred from settlement income into estate accounts, lies, and to remove records after Mr. Bell began making inquiries." Corisande stepped toward him. "You miserable coward." Caro flinched, but he did not stop. "I did wrong." His voice cracked. "I profited from it." He looked toward Marianne. "And I signed a statement because I would rather admit my part than carry hers as well." The silence afterward was enormous. Marianne heard the faint hiss of candles. Nothing else. Belle placed Caro's signed statement beside the settlement copy. Then the Duke stepped forward. Corisande's eyes fixed on him. "This has nothing to do with Ravenshade." He removed several letters from inside his coat. "It does." Marianne watched the room change again. Some guests recognized the handwriting before any explanation. Old seals, old paper, a family crest. The Duke spoke. "My uncle corresponded with Lady Marianne's mother regarding money repaid into an investment intended for her daughter." Corisande said nothing. The Duke continued. "After his death, I found repeated letters asking whether Lady Marianne had received what was due to her. Most went unanswered. 2 were answered." He looked at Lord Edmund. "By you." Edmund nodded. "I believe Marianne preferred not to be involved." "Why?" the Duke asked. Edmund looked toward Corisande. "Because I was told she had no interest in the matter." The Duke's gaze hardened. "And yet the letters addressed directly to Lady Marianne were never given to her." Corisande's composure finally cracked. "You all speak as though I stole bread from a starving child." "No." Marianne spoke for the first time in several minutes. Everyone turned. She walked toward the table. "Not bread, choice." Corisande stared at her. Marianne continued. "You took letters that belonged to me, money that belonged to me, introductions that might have belonged to me, years in which I might have decided how to live." She looked around the ballroom. "I was told I was unwanted. Plain, difficult, too old, too useful for accounts, and not useful enough for society." A few faces lowered. The men who had laughed before did not meet her eyes. Marianne looked back at Corisande. "None of those things wounded me as much as learning they had been arranged." Corisande's breathing had quickened. "You think yourself victorious because you have papers?" "No." Marianne's answer surprised even her. "I think myself free because I no longer need you to agree with them." Corisande stared. Marianne turned to Sir Percival. "The property listed in your marriage arrangement is mine," Belle added quietly. "The documents support that claim." Sir Percival looked at Arabella. "Did you know?" Arabella's eyes filled. "Mamma said it would all be settled." That was not an answer. Sir Percival understood. His mother stood. "We will not sign today." Corisande spun toward her. "You cannot mean, 'we will not sign.' The social consequence arrived before any magistrate could, before any formal proceeding, before any judgment." A chair moved, then another. Lady Wexford crossed the ballroom. For 1 second, Marianne feared she would leave without speaking. Instead, she stopped before Marianne. "Years ago, I received a note declining an invitation in your name." Marianne's chest tightened. "I never declined it." Lady Wexford closed her eyes. "I suspected as much." She turned toward Corisande. "And I regret believing what was convenient." It was not an apology Marianne had expected. She inclined her head. Others began remembering. A dinner invitation, a visit unanswered, a proposal cooled after a strange letter. Nothing became certain all at once. But certainty was no longer necessary for the ballroom to understand the pattern. Corisande saw it too, the doors closing. Not literally, not yet. But invitations would stop, calls would thin, names would be omitted. The very machinery she had used against Marianne was turning. She looked toward her husband. "Do something." Edmund's face changed. Marianne knew that expression. Fear, habit, the old temptation to preserve peace. He looked at Corisande, then at Marianne. "No." One word. Years too late. But still one word. Corisande staggered as though struck. She looked around the room. Nobody came to her. Even Arabella stood frozen beside Sir Percival, unsure where loyalty ended and survival began. Mrs. Keene appeared near the servants' entrance. Corisande saw her. "You." The old woman stepped forward. "Yes, my lady. You poisoned this house against me." Mrs. Keene shook her head. "No. We only remembered what passed through it." A few people drew breath. Corisande's face twisted. Marianne intervened before humiliation turned into cruelty. Enough. Everyone looked at her. She had imagined this moment during cold nights in London, imagined exposing every insult, every lie, every stolen letter. She had thought satisfaction might feel like fire. It did not. It felt like setting down something heavy. Bell collected the papers. Formal matters would follow. Some money would have to be restored. Records examined. Caro questioned further. Corisandi's private account traced. Marianne did not know how every legal detail would end. She did not need to pretend she did. What mattered was already visible. The arrangement could not be signed. Her property could not be quietly transferred. The evidence existed in more than one place, and too many witnesses had heard the truth to push it back into a locked drawer. Guests began leaving early. Not dramatically. That made it worse for Corisande. One family pleaded a long journey. Another remembered an engagement. A third simply requested their carriage. The ballroom thinned. The same society that once laughed together now withdrew one polite household at a time. Corisande watched them go. Arabella finally approached Marianne. Her face was pale. "You have ruined me." Marianne studied her stepsister. "No." Arabella's mouth trembled. "Sir Percival may end the engagement. That will be his decision. You knew this would happen." "I knew the signing would stop." Arabella looked toward her mother, then back. "Why did you not warn me?" Marianne almost answered sharply, then remembered an 11-year-old girl sick with fever, a ribbon mended, a child who had learned cruelty because it was rewarded. "Because if I had warned your mother, she would have hidden the evidence again." Arabella's eyes filled. "You could have told me. Would you have believed me?" Arabella did not answer. That silence was answer enough. Later, Marianne found her father in the garden. The winter air was bitter. The paths shone with frost. By the old stone wall, bare rose stems trembled in the wind. It was the only place in Vailcombe where Marianne had ever been able to speak without feeling the house listening. Edmund stood without a coat. Marianne carried his from the doorway. She held it out. He accepted it. For a while neither spoke. Then he said, "I am sorry." Marianne looked at the dead garden. "I know. I should have protected you, yes. I told myself I was protecting the family." "You were protecting yourself from conflict." He closed his eyes. "Yes, no excuse. No attempt to soften it." "That mattered." He asked, "Can you forgive me?" Marianne thought carefully. For years she had forgiven before anyone apologized. That kind of forgiveness had become another tool used against her. So she answered honestly, "Not yet." Edmund nodded. Tears filled his eyes. He did not ask again. Marianne touched his sleeve once. Not reconciliation, not rejection, something unfinished. That was enough. Corisande found Marianne before she left. She stood alone in the library. The locked drawer had been opened, its contents removed for examination. For the first time, Corisande looked smaller than the room. She spoke without turning. "You always despised me." "No." Corisande looked back. Marianne shook her head. "That would have made everything simpler. Then what do you want from me?" "Nothing." The answer wounded Corisande. Marianne saw it. She had expected punishment, a demand, a victory speech. Nothing was worse. Corisande whispered, "I did what I did for Arabella." "You did some of it for Arabella." Marianne's voice remained gentle. "Some for money, some for control, some because every time father surrendered to you, surrender became easier to demand again." Corisande lowered her eyes. "Will you have me prosecuted?" "That will depend on what the records establish and what Bell advises." Corisande looked almost offended that Marianne would not decide from anger. Then, after a long silence, she said, "I am sorry." Marianne waited. Corisande added, "I should not have said what I said that night." Marianne understood. Even now, Corisande apologized first for the public insult, not the stolen years, not the letters, not the money, the embarrassment. Marianne reached the door, then turned. "The ballroom was never the worst thing you did to me." Corisande's face collapsed. Marianne left. Months later, Willow House became hers in practice as well as on paper. It was smaller than Vailcombe. Far smaller. She loved it immediately. She did not retreat into idleness. Marianne continued working with accounts. Bell sent clients. Widows came. Small property holders came. Women whose husbands had died, leaving piles of confused papers, came. Marianne helped them understand what they possessed before someone else explained it away. She earned her own money. She restored part of Willow House room by room. The Duke visited sometimes, always openly. Their affection grew slowly, not from rescue, not from gratitude, from conversation. He admired that Marianne interrupted him when he was wrong. She admired that he did not punish her for doing so. One afternoon, walking in the little garden behind Willow House, he asked whether she would consider allowing him to court her. Marianne smiled. "Consider I have learned caution around important questions." She laughed. It surprised them both. Then she said yes, not to marriage, not yet, to courtship. Her life no longer moved at other people's speed. At Vale cum Coruscant withdrew from society. Invitations became rare. Several families who had once competed for her attention ceased calling. Caro lost his position and was required to account for money he had taken. Edmund reduced expenses, sold unnecessary luxuries, and began repairing tenant cottages before improving drawing rooms. Arabella's engagement to Sir Percival ended. For a time she blamed Marianne. Then she began slowly and painfully to understand that a future built from another woman's stolen property had never truly belonged to her. One spring morning, Marianne sat at the kitchen table at Willow House. No ballroom, no audience, no chandeliers, only bread cooling on a wooden board, a pot of tea, her notebook and sunlight entering through a window she had chosen to leave uncurtained. Mrs. Keene, now comfortably employed as Marianne's housekeeper, despite insisting that retirement was invented by people with weak opinions, placed a letter beside her cup. From Valecombe. Marianne opened it. Her father had written only 4 lines. The south cottages had new roofs. Mr. Ames's account had been corrected. He hoped Marianne was well. He expected no answer. Marianne read it twice. Then she took out a sheet of paper. Not because everything was healed. It was not. Not because blood erased betrayal. It did not. She wrote because the choice belonged to her. Outside, the last frost was melting from the garden wall, and for the first time Marianne understood that dignity was not something a family granted when it approved of you. It was what remained when you stopped asking permission to possess your own life. No door stays closed forever to the person who finally learns she holds the key. If Marianne's story moved you, please like, subscribe, and support the channel so more stories of courage, justice, and reclaimed dignity can continue to be told. Phần đã viết 4 khoảng 10,50, 8, 12 từ.